Well, for more on Hurricane Florence, as well as other US news this week, we're speaking with Professor Ed Blakely, former White House staffer and advisor to New Orleans after Hurricane Katrina. Ed, thanks so much for coming in this morning.
Yes.
Well, I guess you're seeing some familiar scenes given your previous experience. How do you think the recovery and the emergency effort is going so far?
It's going quite well. This is more rain than anything. Rain's much easier to control than other kinds of disasters. The problem is people. People wanting to go back and see how their belongings are and things like this. But this is going to be a measure of the presidency, which seems silly. But the president's put himself on the line with his Twitter unnecessarily.
And obviously causing a storm in and of himself with his comments about Puerto Rico. What do you make of that? So he's disputing the death toll that they've given for Hurricane Maria a year ago, which he was saying, he's being judged on unfairly. But they have taken the death toll in a normal year, compared with that year, and said the effects of the hurricane, which was not treated properly, has resulted in deaths. Power's been out for months for some people. That storm that he created, how will he fare with that?
Well, look, if you're going to tell a lie, have some truth in it. This lie has no truth in it. So he's just put himself backward, not just with people from Puerto Rico who've now gone to Florida and are voters, but people across the country who saw this devastation. Television is great. It shows you what is happening. And we saw people dying, more than he said died. So why tell that lie? Now, he's pushed himself down to lower than 40% approval rating. That pushed it farther down, and that's going to keep Republicans in the suburbs from going to the polls.
I want to talk more about the president in a moment, but just back on the hurricane. At the time of Katrina, obviously there was a lot of criticism with the way the federal government handled the situation. Have lessons really been learnt there, and what are we seeing in terms of the federal response and the state-based response?
I'm very happy I made that sacrifice in Katrina because things are much better. This is a state-based operation. The feds are back up, but there's strong coordination. That was done while I was in New Orleans and has been done subsequently, usually very well, except for Puerto Rico. And in Puerto Rico, since it's not on the mainland, we didn't have the same kind of systems in place. There are long-term professionals doing this work, and they're doing a good job. But the president's going to take the blame for having made these shockingly terrible statements. And unfortunately, this blame goes deep into people's skepticism, and so they won't evacuate. They'll do silly things. We have that happen here. So this is just going to get worse. And the Carolinas are particularly bad because that coastline is so long and unprotected.
We will get to the midterms more in detail in a moment, but while we're on the subject of the hurricane, will the handling of it affect Republican performance in the midterms, do you think?
Has to. The Republicans will go slightly up. They can't go very high up, but they can go really tumbling down. That's why the Republicans are so nervous about this and so nervous about what the president says. But the professionals are not Republicans or Democrats. They're just people out saving lives. Rebuilding is going to be very, very difficult because the president spent the money elsewhere. He took money out of the FEMA budget and put it in the budget for immigration. People are really upset about that. That means their recovery is going to be very, very slow. And guess what? Elections are coming.
Well, there are a lot of other things playing out which will affect the midterm. So let's talk about the Manafort plea. Remind our viewers, what has he pleaded guilty to? And now that a part of that deal is that he has to cooperate with authorities regarding the Russia probe, what are the implications there?
All right, let's start with what he pleaded guilty for. He pleaded guilty to not filing his federal income tax, to not registering as an agent for a foreign government in the Washington, D.C. case. In the other cases, he was representing a foreign government without a license. He'd also defrauded many institutions and organizations. But the nub of this is, how did he get to be the leader of the Republican Party, having been working for Russians? How did he get there? How did $30 million get in his bank account when he took that job? That's what this is all about. So what the plea is, did you work for the Russians to coordinate activities with the Republican Party while you were there? That's the next shoe to drop. And I think he's going to drop a big one.
Donald Trump had left open the option of pardoning Manafort. It was advised that it would take place after all of these proceedings. Is that option still open?
Yes and no. He could pardon him of some of the federal crimes, but these are state crimes as well. And when it goes to the state, the president has no capacity to pardon. And already these dossiers have been turned over to the states, so you can't be tried twice for the same crime. But he didn't file tax returns in 2 states. So New York can now prosecute him, and Virginia can now prosecute him. Also, he's lied to investigators in 2 states. So if he's pardoned, and that's what he's been told, if you're pardoned, you're going to jail for a longer period of time with these state guys who have nothing in it. So I think if the president pardons him, now that is obstruction of justice.
The White House is saying nothing to see here. These are historical charges, got nothing to do with the election campaign. We've seen other successful prosecutions, and every time the commentary is, oh, this is going to be bad for the president, this is going to be bad for the White House, and yet he just keeps kind of charging through. I mean, is it registering with the base and with the more sort of mainstream population?
The important thing is registering with people who live in the suburbs, who are well educated. Many of them Republicans. They can't stand this. And all the reports I'm getting is people saying, either I'm not going to the polls, or I'm going to the polls just to vote for my member of Congress who I support. And that member of Congress who support is usually in the middle. Somebody who says they're going to do something about this. So it is hurting the president. Every one of these lies is hurting. And Mueller's very smart. He's letting this play out right up to the election without him doing anything.
Now, could a sexual misconduct complaint that has been we've been made aware of derail Brett Kavanaugh's confirmation? This incident, which is alleged to have taken place 30 years ago, which obviously could have implications for US law for years to come. What are you expecting there? Will it have an effect, or again, will it be simply ignored?
Well, I'm not certain here. What the Democrats are trying to do is to just prolong this until after the election. What I said is Kavanaugh's as good as you're going to get. I don't want to talk about what happened 30 years ago, but it could possibly sink him. And the reason it would sink him is the women members of the Senate. They can't go on record having supported a person who's been accused of sexual misconduct. So this is very serious. And there are only 2 votes that count, McCaskill's and the senator from Maine. And if they vote against him, he is done.
And that could all change, couldn't it, with the midterms coming up? If this confirmation is dragged out, can it be dragged out past November? And if so, if the makeup of the Senate changes dramatically, it could be all over for
this nomination. It is over for him. And there will not be anybody coming into the Supreme Court until there's a Democrat in the White House. And those are the stakes here. The Republicans really have to push this, but they've got those 2 women out there who are Republicans who are unlikely to vote for this man. Even if the smell of this is around, they can't go there.
Well, remind our viewers how the House and the Senate changes every 2 years during the midterms, and then what you think is likely to happen.
All right. All the members of the lower house come up every 2 years, 100% of them. 1/3 of the members of the Senate. So the senators, 2 from each state, doesn't matter what your population is. The House is proportioned by population. So some states, like Wyoming, have only 1 member of the House and 2 senators. And that's where the Republicans have a good chance of winning those elections. In this case, the Democrats can win the same number of seats they had. But remember, there's some very far left-wing Republicans running, like Mitt Romney in Utah. And in Arizona, there are 2 women. Both those women sound alike. And Jeff Flake's replacement. So it's possible there'd be a combination of Democrats and Republicans who would block anything coming from Trump in the Senate. In the House, probably the Democrats could win 20 to 24 seats more than they need to do anything. And I hear the impeachment train coming.
Well, we know that Donald Trump's behaviour is already quite erratic, and when he's, backs up against a wall, it's even more so. So how do you think his behaviour would change in a situation playing out like that?
Well, I guess what is expected from all the people I know is resignation, rather than face this. What Mueller has done, and most of us don't recognize this, he stripped Donald Trump of his money. Now he's going after the foundation, all the other assets that Cohen controlled and so forth. Then Trump has to pay all those legal bills for all the women in defenses, which are separate actions. So Trump is getting very tired of this, and his son is almost bound to go to jail. He would say, hey, look, let me out, free me of all this, and the deal will be, don't go on television.
Even if he does resign, which, I don't know, would a man like that with that ego do that? But even if he does that protect him from any prosecutions down the track?
Well, the deal would be like Nixon. The incoming president would give him a pardon into the future, and that's what Nixon had. But that's only for federal crimes, unfortunately. Mr. Trump could still end up in jail.
And all this playing along, and the US economy roaring along at the same time.
It is roaring along, but at a very interesting level. That the jobs people are getting are poorly paid, and so people, now that they have a job, are mad because the job isn't doing much for them. And Mr. Trump is making it worse by closing factories with his tariff measures. So there's anger in the workforce about these crummy jobs that Mr. Trump, they think, is responsible for.
He would argue, though, that he's bringing factories back to America by making imports more expensive and encouraging jobs to come back. There is some evidence of that, isn't there?
No.
No evidence of that.
No, there's no evidence of that. What is happening is it's now smart for a factory to say we're reopening in the States with robots.
I see.
So the number of workers is actually going down, not up. The service sector is still climbing, but those are retail jobs. And the United States has a young population, and so as people have babies, they're buying clothing and this and that. But if he goes after China, the cost of those items are going to go up. So he's in a very difficult position. The thing the United States has is a young immigrant population, and that's what's driving the American economy. And he's talking against it. 10 years from now, it'll be hard for a Republican to win.
Former White House staffer, Professor Ed Blakely, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.